Hello and welcome to part 7 of the Blender Cookie Transformer tutorial series. In this part we will be doing the pre-compositing. It's not a real word, I just made it up, but it's basically compositing in order to save out all of our files in a neat way. So let's get to it. Alright, so let's Control left arrow to go to the node editor, and let's create a quick image editor over here to have something to look at, and then move from the material nodes into the compositing nodes and make sure use nodes is enabled. It's already enabled for me, and oh, I can already see I did some stuff. Let's remove all this stuff and start from scratch. So the thing I want to do is add some input layers. So add an input render layer, and you can see all these passes over here. And it's currently set to the robot. You can choose any of those render layers we made here. But I want to start with the robot, so let's leave it at robot. And here I want to combine these render layers or these passes in some specific way. So what I want to do first is create a composite node, and when I plug this in here I can see the result. And I'm not going to actually use the composite node because whatever you plug in here will be used to save as your output. But what I want to do is create some custom output nodes, so some custom file output nodes. So I'm going to use these guys to save my passes to specific folders I create, and this is very useful. But I'm going to use the composite node for previewing here. You can also use a viewer node, whatever you like. So yeah, what do we have here? Okay, you can see the emit pass doesn't show anything. Diffuse direct doesn't either. That's because I enabled those passes after I rendered. So I need to re-render this this render layer to access these passes. So let's do that now. Alright, there we go. And now you can see some fancy colors, and that's because this is the diffuse direct pass. Let's look at the diffuse indirect pass. It's slightly different. Diffuse color, like that, glossy, and all these passes seem to work. Alright, so how do I want to combine those? If you watched any of Bartek Skorupa's tutorials, you may know how this is being done, but I'm gonna show you quickly. So for the first thing, this is not very useful for compositing directly. And what I mean by this is that this doesn't look like the robot. So what I need to do is somehow combine all these diffuse passes to one or two more useful passes. And in this case, I want to make a distinction between the direct lighting and the indirect lighting. So to get only the direct lighting, I need to multiply the direct diffuse with the color. So let's create a color node, a mix node, and set it to multiply. And turn off this preview, I don't need that. So plug in the diffuse direct pass and multiply it with the color. And then we get something like this. This looks more like the robot, more like the original colors. So this is very useful. Let's plug it into my file output node, and let's change some of these settings. Alright, let's go quickly to the render output and just set this to a preview file. I'm gonna enter 2 slashes to go into my folder where I saved the blend file, and then let's create a folder called renders, then preview, and then just preview dash hashtags. Those are the numbering .jpg. I just want a JPEG preview. And the thing because the reason I do this is just we need to use the composite node, and if we don't do this, it doesn't run the compositing stage at all. So we do need to plug in something here and then save it out as a JPEG, and it can be useful for previewing. So yeah, that's what I'm going to do. Set to JPEG so it doesn't make huge files, and then use these file output nodes for the real passes we need. So over here I need to enter another base path, and I'm going to just enter the same. So I'm going to go into my original folder with 2 slashes, and then in renders, and let's call this robot passes, and just enter a base path and don't enter a file name, because the file name you have to set here. So let's call this pass diffuse direct, because it's the direct diffuse pass, and then the numbering with hashtags dot we don't really need to enter an extension. Let's set the file format to OpenEXR. I'm going to leave it at RGB because I'm going to render out a separate alpha pass, and turn off the Z buffer. I don't need that, and I'm going to actually set it to half, because then the files won't be as big, and yeah, we still have enough information about the colors, just to save some file storage. So yeah, I'm going to set it to float half. It will be 16-bit, which is enough for me. And in the format, when I check this, it will use this node format, and if I don't check it, I can set a different format. I'm going to use that only for the alpha mask. Alright, so we have a diffuse direct path pass. It will be saved with this file name in the base path. So in the original folder where the blend file is stored, renders and robot passes, and you can choose anything you like, and it's just very useful to organize everything in a neat way. All right, and now we can add multiple inputs. So the next input would be diffuse indirect. All right, and what I want to input in here, this is diffuse direct. I can duplicate this multiply node and plug in the diffuse indirect, and then multiply again with the color, and it will give us the indirect lighting onto the robot. So let's plug it in here and move on to the glossy part. And for the glossy, I actually want to do exactly the same I did with the diffuse. So let's duplicate those two multiply nodes, plug in the glossy direct, multiply it with the glossy color. Oops, that's the wrong one. And let's see what this looks like. This is just the glossy, all the direct reflections. And now the indirect, multiply it with the color, and this is the indirect reflection. You can see the ground reflection, for example. So yeah, let's add 2 more inputs and rename these to glossy direct and glossy indirect. And plug them in. Alright, cool. Let's move on. Transmission. And for the transmission, I don't need the distinction between direct and indirect, so I'm going to combine them into one pass. And the way to do that is, well, first, the way to make the complete, for example, the complete diffuse pass is to add these two together. But you can also add them first and then multiply, and then you only need 3 nodes instead of 4. So instead of multiplying these together and these together and then adding, I'm going to add these two together first and then multiply it with the color. So let's just do it. Set it to add. By the way, I just duplicated one of these nodes. Add the direct and indirect together, and it will look like this. There's not a lot of transparency going on. Anyway, then multiply it with the transmission color. So again, duplicate one of these multiply nodes and just multiply the result of the add node with the color. And that will give you the complete transmission pass. So yeah, let's add another input and call it transmission. Oops, forgot to add the file numbering. Alright, plug it in and there we go. Final thing is the emission. It's actually on top, but let's just add it over here. Call the next file, call it emission, and number it. And alright, and plug in the emission pass. And if you want to move this to the top, you can, if you want to, like that. Emission is now on the top to make this a little bit more organized. Alright, and now we need to add an alpha mask, because I only save the RGB values of every pass. So I need to add a separate alpha file. Let's call it alpha, very simple. And yeah, let's plug in the alpha and move it to the top. Alright, and then I don't want to use the node format. I want to use a simple PNG file, black and white since it's only alpha, and make the color up 16-bit to have some more detail at especially the edges of the robot. So yeah. Alright, I think this will do it. So now we render all these passes, we combine them, so we get the useful passes, and we go from like a lot of passes to only 5 or 6, excuse me, 7 in this case. So we reduce the amount of storage we need, and we save them in a separate folder, robot passes in the renders folder, and we call them, we can rename them as we like. Alright, so this will save all the robot files. Next thing is the debris. I'm going to do a similar thing basically. So yeah, I'm going to actually just quickly select this all and duplicate it. And then change the layer to debris. Alright, let's see what we have for the debris layer. And I can see this is the transmission is enabled. Oh yeah, that's great. We need that. Alright, so everything's set up to be saved in the same folder, which is not what we want. Let's check if everything works. The emission is not being used, so that's a good thing. Let's go into emission and remove it. Alright, only 6 passes, which is what we want. And actually, actually let's just do this. And then I want to set the folder to debris passes instead of robot passes. And then I can still use the exact same file names because they are being saved in a different folder, so this is not a problem. Yeah, okay. I think everything is set up properly. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so the background is going to be a little bit more complicated. Let's add manually a render layer and duplicate it. So we have 2. Set it to background and background clean. Okay, let's take the composite node to see what we have here. Alright, so this is the background and this is the background without the robot reflections. So as I said, the shadow pass, I'm gonna create that from the diffuse passes. So let's do this, and let's combine all the diffuse passes to one diffuse pass. So the way to do that is like I did before. First add the two, the direct and the indirect. And you can see it doesn't work because we have to re-render this because we didn't render the passes out yet. So yeah, let's do that. Alright, there we go. And as you can see, this starts to look like a shadow pass. If we zoom in, you can see it's a bit grainy, but that's okay. So yeah, this is just diffuse and the direct and indirect diffuse passes added. Now I have to multiply with the color, and this is not going to do a lot, not going to make a lot of difference, I guess, because the color is just something gray. Yeah, there we go. So this is the only the diffuse of the background layer. I need to do the same thing for the background clean layer. So let's duplicate those two nodes and move them over and plug them in just the same way. Add the diffuse passes and multiply with the color. And this is just nothing because we didn't render. So let's re-render this thing. Alright, it's just a boring, plain, diffuse looking plane. Alright, but now I have to make get this, and as you can see, it's exactly the same, only the shadows are different. So the way to combine this is, well, you can do it in multiple ways, but the way I like to do it is get a shadow pass which is completely white except for the shadows which are darker, because then you can multiply the pass with the original shot and it will create a realistic shadow, because anything that's bright and well lit will get a lot darker when you multiply it with something dark, but anything that's already black, it doesn't get much darker because it's already dark. It's basically multiplying a small number with a small number. It creates just a smaller number, but it's still small. Multiply a high number, so a bright color, with a small number will make it a lot darker. So that's the way I want to do it. So I want to make everything that's no difference white. So this should be all white, only the shadow should be a little bit darker. So how to do this? Well, when I use a divide node, let's go to color mix and choose divide. I don't know if you can read it. choose divide and divide the background with the background clean, and let's look at the result. A white pass with only the shadows darker, and the background is black. That's a problem, but the rest looks pretty good, I think. So this way you can create a shadow pass, and it will also include parts that are above white, which will brighten up your scene. So indirect lighting is also included, and ambient occlusion, everything's included in this pass, and it's all being added to the scene when you multiply with this pass. Alright, so yeah, one thing we have to fix is this black background. So what happens if we when we do this, we divide black by black, which is dividing by 0, which doesn't really work too well. So a little trick I used to fix this is to actually just add a separate mix layer or mix node to the divider and just add a little bit of color to this. I'm adding white, but I'm gonna set the factor to 0.001. Alright, that tends to work. So what we're doing now, we don't divide by 0 anymore, but we do divide 0 by this. So the result is still 0. So the way to fix this is to add this node to the top as well, and that will fix the problem. And the result is now a little bit less accurate because we're adding this number. So yeah, let's actually make sure this number is the same for both of them. So just input a value and plug it into the factor. Alright, there we go. Let's collapse them and make this a really small value. There we go. I can make it even smaller to make it more precise, so 0.00001 for example, and it still works. And this is small enough to don't have a major effect on all of this stuff. And we have a clean shadow pass, so all this stuff is 1 or almost 1, and so it doesn't have any effect when we multiply. And when we multiply with this darker color, it will create a nice shadow. Alright, so this is going to be the shadow, so let's add an output file node and save it into renders, and let's call this background. Set this as the base path and make it OpenEXR half, no Z buffer, and let's call it shadow pass. And number it accordingly. Alright, so now we have a shadow pass. Let's plug in this result and we're good to go. Okay, moving on to the reflections. So I want to do the same thing with the glossy part. I want to just duplicate those nodes and plug them in the same way. So add the direct and indirect and multiply with the color. Let's see what this gives us. Oops. And I'm going to plug it into the shadow pass, of course. I want to plug it into the to my composite to make it create the preview. Alright, so this is only the glossy, the reflections basically of the background. Looking great. Alright, so do the same thing with the clean background. Oops. and that will look something like this. Exactly the same except for the robot. Alright. So, okay, the way I want to add the reflections is not by multiplication, because there are some of really dark materials like black which is still reflective. So what happens when we multiply with black, it doesn't change because black is 0. So that means when you multiply, you cannot change black really. But black materials can still have reflections, so I need to do something else. And the way I think is best is just to add the reflections with a plus node. So what I want to have is everything black except for the reflections, because adding black won't change, won't make a difference. Adding something other than black, something brighter or something darker, will make the original either darker or brighter, which is exactly what I want. In this case, we can see the reflection of the robot is actually darker than nothing, because the reflection of the sky is brighter. So for the original shot, we want to make the reflection of the robot, we want to actually subtract something. So in other words, add a negative value. So okay, enough explanation. Let's just create this. So the way I want to combine those two is subtract them, basically, because when I subtract this this pass from this one, this becomes 0, because this is exactly the same for both of them. So this becomes black, and this part is the only part which will be different. So yeah, let's do it. Let's add a color mix node, set it to subtract. Don't know if you can read it. Subtract. Plug in this first glossy combination and the second, and then we get something like this. And it looks all black except for this part and some parts over here. And this is the reflection of the light of the eyes of the robot. So this becomes, when we add this to the original shot, it becomes brighter. And when we and the rest, this is all 0, so just nothing. But the values over here are negative. So when we add this pass to the original, it will actually have some effect. And I can quickly show you an example. If you just use an add mix node, set it to add, and now we are adding to white, so it doesn't really change. No, so let's make this gray, and now you can see we do have a reflection. And yeah, I found this way works best. So it's a bit red over here, and yeah, if we add this to the original shot, it will work. And if it doesn't, you can always do something that's similar to add. It's called screen, and it gives you similar results. Anyway, let's save out this pass as the reflections. So this is the file output. Let's add another output and call it reflection pass. Reflection. And number it. Alright, I'm going to use the original node format and plug it in. Okay, that was a lot of stuff, and I think we are done compositing, so let's quickly save. And now for the composite output node, I'm going to just use this as a preview, so I'm going to plug in the original robot image, which looks like this, and I don't use alpha because I'm saving as JPEG. So it will save some preview JPEGs in a preview folder, and the rest of the passes will be saved in all these folders we specified here. So I really like this method to save disk space, to combine the passes before you save them. And yeah, I think we are ready to render. So I can quickly look at my settings here. I want to make sure transparent is enabled. In the performance, I'm currently rendering with my GPU, so the tile size I use is actually the best one is 256 by 256 for GPUs. As for most GPUs, this is the fastest way to render. And I'm going to leave this at the default. Yep. Make sure compositing is enabled, of course. And I'm going to set the resolution to 1280 by 720, since this is the same resolution as my original shot. So let's press Ctrl F12 and we start rendering. Stupid mistake, I forgot to uncheck this little button, so when I pressed Ctrl F12 it only rendered the active render layer. So make sure this is not checked when you render your final animation, because then to make sure every render layer is being used. Alright, again, Ctrl F12. Alright, so as you can see, it's rendering now, and I do want to show you one final thing, and that is how everything's being saved. So here, this is my project folder with my blend file, and by the two forward slashes we created a folder inside this project folder called renders, and we have all the different folders we created here. So background has all the background passes, debris, robot, everything seems to work. And we have a little preview which is completely black, I guess, because at this point the robot is still flying somewhere in the air, so that's exactly how we expect it to be. So yeah, there you go. This is a really neat way to organize everything, and we are going to use all these files in the next part where we will be compositing everything on top of the original shot. So I will see you in the next final part.